Welcome to the Vitality Equation, exploring research in health and well-being one paper at a time. So glad you all could join us today. I'm really excited about our topic. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately.
Yeah, me too. It's fascinating, actually, how much our social lives are tied to our physical health, not just mentally. It's like we all know loneliness is bad, but the cellular level impacts are whoa.
Absolutely, it's wild. I mean, we hear about stress and its impact, but connecting it to isolation and then seeing it all the way down to aging cells. It's a whole new perspective on public health, isn't it?
Yeah, the way they connect the dots, it's really comprehensive. It's not just about subjective feelings of loneliness. They actually go into the biological mechanisms, looking at things like telomere length, inflammation, and immune function. It's really compelling evidence that this is not just some abstract emotional thing.
And what I find so interesting is that it's not just about the presence or absence of social contact, but the quality of that contact. You could be surrounded by people but still feel incredibly lonely, and that's going to have an impact, right? It's not just being around bodies.
Oh, absolutely. It's that feeling of genuine connection, of belonging, of being seen and heard. It's not just about having a full social calendar. I think the research paper talks about that specific point, doesn't it? The difference between perceived and objective isolation.
Yeah, they differentiate between social isolation, which is more about the objective measure of having fewer social contacts, and loneliness, which is the subjective experience of feeling isolated. They even mention how your perception of social connection plays a larger role in health outcomes than the sheer number of contacts you have, which is fascinating because I've seen so many people who are always surrounded by others, but inside are feeling so incredibly alone. I see it all the time. And we might even be able to learn new things about how to help people by targeting that subjective experience.
Right, and that's where it hits home for me. You can't just force someone to have more friends or spend more time with people and assume the problem is solved. I mean, the paper goes into the physiological side of it so well. The inflammation, the impact on the HP axis. It's incredible how stress and perceived isolation can wreak havoc on the body. The sleep disturbances, the exercise impact, they all just pile on. It's like a negative feedback loop.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to bring up. That stress response, it triggers inflammation, and then that inflammation ages our cells. I was just reading something about telomeres too, and that's linked, isn't it? That's what this paper explains so well. Shortening of telomeres is an indicator of aging at the cellular level, and it's accelerated by chronic stress and inflammation. And isolation just piles all of that on.
Telomeres, yes, they're like the protective caps on our DNA strands, and they shorten each time a cell divides. When they get too short, the cells can't function properly, which leads to cellular senescence. And that's linked to many age-related diseases. The paper really lays out the pathways, the complex cascade of biological effects. It's not just one single thing going wrong, it's a whole cascade of issues. And the cognitive load from that kind of stress, it just gets to you. It's really hard to cope with chronic stress.
And that's where the exercise piece really hits me because when you're lonely, your motivation to be active often drops. You lose that sense of purpose, and it just becomes easier to withdraw. And the chronic inflammation just makes everything harder. The inflammation is like poison. It makes sleep harder. It stops the body from recovering efficiently. It just drags you down. I think this is one of the reasons why exercise programs that have a social element do so much better. It's that community factor that's so vital.
Exactly. And it's all interconnected, isn't it? The lack of social connection leads to stress. That leads to inflammation. That leads to cellular aging and disease. You are spot on about the motivation. It's not just about having a gym partner. It's about having that sense of belonging and also the positive impact of movement. I've noticed myself when I'm feeling down. It's so much harder to go to the gym, but if I'm meeting a friend there, it's like a different story. It makes the habit stick. It's easier, more enjoyable. And even outside of exercise, I think that sense of community is powerful.
Yeah, and that motivation piece is huge from a cognitive perspective. When you're feeling lonely or isolated, it can impact your executive function, your ability to plan, to make decisions. You get into these cognitive patterns where you're more likely to withdraw and less likely to engage in social activities, creating a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes a vicious cycle of negative self-talk, which then makes it harder to get back out into the world, and then the loop continues. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a huge tool to help address this cycle. The thinking part of it. And it works with your behavior. It's not just about feeling.
That's a really great point because I think a lot of people just see it as a willpower thing, you know? Like, just go out there and make friends. But it's not that simple. When your brain and body are already in a stress response, that fight or flight mode, it's so much harder to engage. And then, of course, sleep suffers because the stress response doesn't shut down effectively. And when you're exhausted, that also impacts your ability to connect and engage and maintain habits. It becomes this huge complex web of interwoven factors that impact your health. And poor sleep just makes all of the other problems worse.
Totally. And the paper touches on that too, the impact on the immune system. When you're chronically stressed and lonely, your immune system can become dysregulated, making you more susceptible to infections and disease. It's like your body is so busy fighting this internal stress battle that it's less able to fight off external threats. The body is just not optimized. And that's also at a cellular level, which is insane. The whole system shuts down and starts to age. It's terrifying in some ways to consider. It's a really stark warning, isn't it?
Absolutely terrifying, but also kind of empowering. Because if we understand these mechanisms, we can start to work towards solutions. It's not all doom and gloom. We can actually make changes. That's why I find the cognitive aspect so hopeful, because we can learn to reshape our thinking patterns and our perceptions of our social world. We can use techniques like cognitive reframing and challenging negative thoughts. That's an active process that we can consciously engage in to help ourselves.
Yeah, and from my perspective, it just highlights the critical importance of creating opportunities for social connection and activity. It's not just about individual responsibility. It's about creating communities and environments that encourage social engagement and physical activity. And sleep. We can actively train ourselves to get better at sleeping and to develop better habits that support more restful and deeper sleep. We're not talking about hours of sleep here. We're talking about quality and the way sleep is approached. You can make it work for you with simple techniques. You just have to be consistent.
I love that. It's so true. And it's not just about big structural changes. It's about small, daily habits too. Like making a conscious effort to connect with people, even if it's just a quick chat. Practicing mindfulness or meditation, because that can help regulate the stress response. And also things like mindful movement. When you're more present, you can see and notice those around you so much better. It helps reduce the cognitive load and give you space to breathe so you can focus on things. It really is like a ripple effect, isn't it?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that these habits all build on each other. When you start with the small things, like challenging a negative thought pattern, it can make it easier to engage socially. And then when you engage socially, that can also impact on your stress response and make it easier to maintain healthy habits. You can actively choose to break out of those loops or create new ones. It's not always easy, but it's not impossible. We know from the research that there's plasticity within our brains. We can train them to better.
Absolutely. The more we get up and move, the better we feel, the better we sleep. And the less pain you have, the more likely you are to keep doing it. And when you build that consistency, that regular schedule, it helps your circadian rhythm, which is critical for good sleep. It's also important to remember that physical activity doesn't have to be intense. A walk in nature can be just as powerful as a gym session in some ways. The fresh air, the changing scenes, the sunlight, they all contribute to good sleep and a sense of well-being.
That's so good to hear. And I think the key is that it's not about being perfect. It's about making small, consistent changes that add up over time. I know I can get caught up in these all or nothing thinking patterns and then get burnt out. So focusing on little wins is the key. And I think focusing on your values, what's important to you, so you can see the things you do as meaningful. Even making a quick call to your family and friends can have a huge impact if it's something you value.
Right, because the pressure to suddenly become a social butterfly is unrealistic. But you can start by setting small, achievable goals. Maybe it's reaching out to one person this week or challenging one negative thought a day. That's how you build those cognitive muscles, step by step. You have to break it down and make it actionable. It's not about trying to solve everything at once, but it's about taking those first steps, and that initial small change can lead to bigger changes down the line. And being patient with yourself. It's not a linear process.
And it's really the same with exercise and sleep. It's about finding what works for you and being consistent. Maybe it's starting with a 15-minute walk or just focusing on sleep hygiene and that consistent bedtime. It's about creating a routine that makes things feel achievable. You can start small and build up. I think people focus too much on high impact and forget that small impact adds up. It's about building a foundation that supports your mind and body, and that helps you create positive feedback loops.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of this research. It's not just about diagnosing problems, it's about empowering us to take control of our health. It's about creating a toolkit for life and understanding the impact of our choices on every level, down to the cells of our body. I really feel like I understand the importance of community so much better after this.
Absolutely. It's a call to action, both individually and collectively. We need to be mindful of our own social well-being and create communities that support mental and physical health. And it really highlights the importance of addressing our cognitive patterns and learning to view the world and ourselves in a more positive way. It's a great motivator for sure. And to really see that it's not all in your head, but also in your body.
And it really does show the impact that policy can have. By investing in community initiatives and safe public spaces that encourage exercise and social interaction, we're investing in the long-term health of everyone and better sleep education that can be life-changing for so many people. It's amazing how interlinked all of it is. Everything is connected.
So, looking forward, what do you both think are some of the most important areas for future research? What did this research prompt in your mind?
From my perspective, I think more research is needed on the effectiveness of different cognitive interventions in reducing loneliness and improving health outcomes. We need to understand which techniques are most effective for different populations and how to personalize these interventions. Also, I think looking at the neuroscience of isolation and how it impacts on cognitive processes and how different social groups with different characteristics respond. That's so important. There is definitely so much more to explore.
I'd really like to see more research into the optimal types of physical activity for reducing inflammation and improving sleep in socially isolated populations. Like, can certain types of exercise be more effective? And what are the best strategies for making those activities accessible to people in different settings? Also, more research on the specific impact of sleep on these problems and how different sleep techniques can help people. It's really a missing piece in so many research papers.
Yeah, I think we're only just scratching the surface of how much our social connections, our cognitive frameworks, and our choices impact us at the cellular level. It's so incredibly fascinating.
Absolutely. And the more we delve into it, the more we can learn to improve our health and well-being and the health of those around us. It really highlights the interconnectedness of everything.
Well, this has been an amazing discussion, and I think it's really highlighted the profound impact that our social world has on our health, and how many tools and techniques we actually have. We've covered so much today, and I hope it's been helpful and informative for our listeners. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really insightful.
It was so great to be here. Thank you. This has been very informative and really insightful. The multi-level perspective is very powerful. I think this is a really important discussion, and hopefully we've all learned something today.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed this conversation and digging into this paper. And it's really helpful to hear different viewpoints. Looking forward to the next episode.